Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. Each week, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest this week is Jonathan Marsal. Jonathan is a managing director at Alvarez and Marsal in the Disputes and Investigations Group. Jonathan, welcome.
Hey, George. Morning.
Morning. Glad to have you here. Glad you were able to join us and appreciate that you're wearing a vest.
Yeah, it's vest season for sure.
It certainly is. Well, I'd like to start out not by going into the substantive topics we talked about, but rather by having you give our audience members a sense of who you are and what you do, how you got into eDiscovery, and what your role looks like today.
Yeah, sure. So I think all of us in eDiscovery have usually a funny story to how we get in, or certainly didn't think we would be in this industry when we went to school and things. So I got involved in a startup just right after college, really at a good time, around the time that the federal rules of civil procedure changed to sort of spark our industry in 2006. I had joined a couple years prior to that, and we sort of saw the need coming in the legal space. It was in the DC market at the time, and we grew rapidly as a result. So by the time more and more clients were sort of shifting from paper-based discovery to digital discovery, we were primed and ready to handle that demand. So we did really well in that market, and sold the company after a few years of growth, maybe a little early on the cycle of companies selling, but sold nonetheless to Navigant in 2011. And I was really there ever since. I did do a stint in our London office as part of my role there. So I spent 2013 to 2017 in Navigant's London office. Then I came back to the U.S., was based in Chicago, and Navigant sold really all of its disputes businesses to Ankara in 2018. So I was at Ankara up until just last year. I moved to A&M in November of last year. But so really at the same job with just different kind of business cards and email addresses for a few years due to acquisition. But this is my first big shift. But as far as eDiscovery goes, I mean, I sort of have done it ever since that startup. I certainly didn't think it was the type of job, even when I got into it, that would take me around the world, and had the fortune to be able to practice in London and throughout Europe and deliver work in over I think 4 continents. I've done work on site with clients. So really over the years shifted a little bit from doing mostly litigation work in the US to investigation work abroad. And prior to GDPR, had a specialty around cross-border data. And I say prior to GDPR because it was a little easier to move data, or sorry, a little harder to move data actually before GDPR. It's sort of like GDPR set the rules that make it a little easier. So for years, I had to do all the work in country just to even prevent any sort of data movement happening. So I had a practice around taking the full complement of technology on the road, either on laptops or Peli cases, to client sites and running projects in country. So that sort of work has died down a bit, and it's a little easier to transfer data these days. But and I moved back to the US, so I do a little less cross-border work from here.
These days, you're at Alvarez and Marsal. What are you doing there?
Yeah, so I lead our forensic technology practice at Alvarez and Marsal. We focus on digital forensics, e-discovery, and data analytics. It's usually in support of disputes and investigations, so we sit under that banner at A&M. So anything from forensic accounting investigations to also helping our bankruptcy wing. So A&M is really well known as a bankruptcy administrator, and there's often the need for collection and preservation and discovery activities, as well as data analytics for either just preserving the assets of the estate, the digital assets of the state, or any downstream litigation that may come out of it.
Well, you started off by talking about how you got into e-discovery as an early entrant into the market. We continue to have new entrants in the market or organizations that are in one fashion or another re-entering the market. You've got some observations on that. Let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's really interesting how the technology landscape has changed so much, even in the last few years. Certainly, the rise of SaaS-based platforms and cloud-based technologies have helped that. So I think for years there was a big barrier to entry for folks to get into the market as the need to scale became so expensive. So you had providers sort of needed to get bigger to afford the economies of scale you need for infrastructure and software licenses to then deliver to the demand of their clients. And so I think that's a lot of the reason you saw a lot of consolidation with the big players for a number of years, and you saw less entrance into the market. But as any market matures, you sort of get consolidation, then you get breakups. I think kind of e-discovery is going through that second wing where um, you know firms had merged, and now the leaders of those firms are spinning off and saying, I've got client demands that I think I can service sort of separately from the big entity now, and those barriers to entry aren't as high as they used to be. So folks can get a SaaS license of a product, get the scale that they need, and still deliver at a cost that allows them to price relative to market, in line with even the biggest players.
Now, with SaaS licenses, there still are economies to scale, at least in theory.
Sure.
It sounds like that's not as great an impediment now, though, as it was in the past.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think and you think about just what it would cost to buy SQL servers and storage to support it and RAM to support it back when. You can scale that up to meet the demands of a project, but then scale it back down when you don't need it. And so the sunk cost investment has gone down. It still probably costs more, or at least the same, to deliver a big project, even if you're in SaaS, but it's more incremental to the project you're trying to deliver, and you can kind of pull it back down when you need to.
What does this change mean for clients?
Well, I think it makes the landscape maybe difficult to navigate for clients because you're trying to, figure out if the value that you need is for the company, the entity that delivers the services, or the people that do it. And I think, clients that are embroiled in cases, what they want probably more than anything is the people that have delivered for them for years to be there with them, to be an extension of their team, to be able to trust that when they pick up the phone, they're not going to get, an 800 number or get put into a ticketing queue, but they get the person that they know and like. And so if you get to a point with a provider that you can't get that person anymore, and you see them off on their own or off at a different company that might be smaller, I think you can go get that now. And I think that makes it interesting. But if you're a corporation trying to do that, you still have to kind of go through procurement to onboard that partner. So it can still kind of be tricky. You can still kind of sort of see in LinkedIn, there's the person I want to work with, but how can I actually engage their firm? So it's still a lengthy process to go through. And I think, corporations obviously don't want to have a million providers that they've given access to and allow client data to go through. They need to go through their procurement process in the right way. So it's not as wide open as it probably could be, but I think you're going to see corporations and law firms have kind of larger panels as they want to onboard the people they want to work with.
From the provider side, then, what sort of opportunities does this shift to SaaS and the diminished need for a large infrastructure on site, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah. I
Opportunities?
mean, a little bias working for a consulting firm, of course, but I
Mhm.
think it allows practitioners to consult more and think less about the volume side of things. So I think when you build that big factory that allows for data processing, data hosting at scale, um, there's sort of demand. You've increased your need to put volume through it, and I don't think e-discovery was ever meant to be about how many gigabytes or terabytes can we push through an engine. It was supposed to be about finding facts, finding the truth, helping lawyers make sense of their case. And so um, I think when the cost has come down, whether it's SaaS or even on premise, they'll come down as well. I think you're in a position where you can be strategic about what data you push through, try to find the right data as quickly as you can, and then use different technologies to get through it quicker. So things like AI, and other mechanisms to kind of call the data faster, and then that becomes the competitive advantage rather than the speed to ingest. Um, Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just think going away from that need to push volume through, I think, is important. It's good for providers that are more nimble and don't need that overhead cost covered by volume. They can be more consultative.
Since you first got into this market, one of the recurring themes has been, what do we do about emerging data sources? And that, of course, is a large theme right now. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's funny how we did go through a period where I don't want to say it got easy, because by no means it was, but volume increased, but the formats were pretty standardized for a while, and there was this great Goldilocks period when people finally stopped using Lotus Notes and normalized on Outlook that our jobs kind of got pretty turnkey for a while. But yeah, the emergence of data, I mean, it continues to be a problem. You hear people talk about it all the time, even basic platforms like Teams and Slack that folks use every day. There's not great turnkey solutions to pump it out, and then the format is still varied. So you hear a lot of people breaking up chats by a day. That seems to be the most common increment that people go with. But as everyone that's in Teams all day knows, that you can go in and out of many conversations in the course of a day. So breaking up by a day doesn't really help a lawyer or reviewer make sense of it. And the same goes for mobile phone data, which can be pretty scattered. So I still think there's a lot to be done there. I think we need to think about what constitutes a conversation and how to break it up. I think AI could help organize the data a little better if we could break it up better, so that you actually get the conversation in context rather than it's scattered across a time period. But there's still some work to do there, and you see it coming up a lot. And then in addition to that, another is, I would think of it as emerging data source. It's the same sources of data, but you have this nuance where you have unlicensed versions or sort of rogue versions of software being used by employees of the company, whether it's a BYOD, personal device of some sort, or folks getting their own Salesforce license because they don't like the company's version, or the CRM the company uses isn't what they want. And so now they're conducting business in a sort of unlicensed version of the software that's tied to a personal account. And so in addition to the complexity of dealing with that data, you got to go figure out that the custodian has it. That usually comes through in the interview process, but they're gonna tell you where everything is, and then you're suddenly at their house trying to find their personal laptop where they had a personal Salesforce connection. It can just go down a rabbit hole that's very difficult, and then once you get access to the data, you still have all the same challenges of trying to normalize it and get it back into the review work stream.
One of the differences between that Goldilocks moment and now is that we do have so many different sources of data that we're working with, even if it's chat messages. There's so many different types of chat messages. And then we're dealing with chat as a means of communication, email as a means of communication, text messages outside of a platform like Streams. What thoughts do you have on how folks can most effectively navigate all of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think again, going back to the interview process, that's super important to understand what people use day to day. Usually, sitting down with the case team prior to getting in that interview and the company's IT and saying, look, I understand you have these policies. I understand you have protocols of what people are supposed to do, but is there any chance that somebody could use their personal device for conducting business, and if so, are we able to get it? And then and just thinking through how hard it is to actually get someone's personal device if you have to. I think that's we're talking about it from a data perspective, but physically, how do you go and meet that person and say, hey, give me your iPhone, I'm going to make a copy of it? And depending on the level of the person, it can be a tricky situation. And we've had to do it for CEOs of companies that are saying, no way are you going to get my device, and the lawyers and we're all standing there in our suits saying, well, you got to hand it over. And have even had a colleague of mine have to do it in the waiting room before the CEO took off on a private jet. So I was sitting there with a Cellbrite kit trying to quickly collect an iPhone, and then assure them that we're not there for their personal data. So having that process in place to kind of segregate all their personal information from the company information, it's a little bit of investigation work that you have to do to get there, and then again that interview to just make sure you are as targeted as possible to collect it. But once you have it all, I think just trying to understand what the needs of the case are, what data you're looking for. Is there a way to carve it up? Is there a way to target exact communications you need, just like we do with email or any other medium at that point? Can you get it down to a way that makes sense? Go find the messages you need and sort of leave the rest behind is usually what we're trying to do.
It sounds as if on that first part, you've got two sets of challenges you need to navigate sometimes simultaneously. One is with the client, as in your example from the waiting room, but the other has got to be with the law firm attorneys or support staff as well. Their expectations perhaps might not always be realistic. They might not fully understand what you need to accomplish on their behalf. How do you navigate those waters?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I mean, I think experience is really what it's about for us more than anything. I think we try to, and myself, put people out in the field doing that kind of work that have sort of been down that path before. They understand the personal implications of talking to somebody. They understand the political ramifications, if you will, of the conversation and how difficult they are, but are prepared to deal with it through that experience. I think there's been an effort to reduce costs in this market for a long time, which understand any business that goes through maturity, you see a reduction in price. But one of the hardest things we do is go and face off to very, very senior folks at a corporation to get their data, because it's just usually the situation is not the most friendly of just handing it over. And it's not always because they don't want to share their data. Often it's just they don't have the time to not have their device and have it out of their pockets and inconvenience. So we often have to do things overnight and at other times. But so we just try to be flexible, use our experience and knowledge, try to get in as quick as we can and get out, and push back on the legal team if we need to. I think often you're right. The legal team is thinking, okay, we got to get everything. It's got to be now. We have to do it by this date. But we understand when you're dealing with sort of high level folks at a company, you're not going to always have that flexibility and to get them whenever you need. So we need to work around their schedules and just be flexible.
Another part of what you do is to help enterprises bring in technology. Let's talk about that some.
Yeah, that's right. And a little plug for myself, talking about it next week at the Masters Conference in Miami.
And for the audience members, what date is that Masters Conference and where in Miami?
That is at Holland and Knight on Tuesday in Miami. So that's the 24th, I believe.
Yep.
So yeah, not I picked a good spot to speak in January to get away, I think, going down to Miami. But
prudent planning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think a lot of companies for years, I think, started to bring technology in house. At least the ones that have, recurring litigation or big government investigation needs. So you saw this for a while with the banks and healthcare, life sciences type companies bring technology, and I think we're starting to see that expand now to more of the general market, where companies are seeing that there is an advantage to having some legal technology in house, and it's not just for e-discovery platforms. It can be, contract management, all sorts of things. So we've been seeing clients asking us to help kind of introduce that to them using our experience of building operations to service our clients to help them bring that in house. So really just thinking about the meat, how things are done. So they often, what happens is the client will procure technology on their own, which makes sense. They get it, they buy a license, they install it, they say, oh great, I've got an e-discovery tool now or a contract management platform now, but then they have to think about how to actually execute in it, and that's where we help. So writing the documentation that they need that actually talks about when you need data, what process do you go through, who do you actually call, where, do you send an email to somebody, do you pick up the phone, what does that look like, what types of matters do you want to push through your in-house platform versus going to your traditional out-of-house. So maybe certain internal investigations, insider threat. So we're seeing a little blur over where it's sort of a cyber world where you're sort of kind of looking to monitor for insider threats in employee communications, but using e-discovery platforms. Employee disputes is a big area where we see internal use, or maybe even just a first pass for potential litigation. So you've received a complaint or an SEC subpoena or whatever it may be, and you want to just triage it in-house before calling in experts. So really helping them put in all those playbooks and workflows that can allow them to service that, and then think about what the team and that team's capacity looks like, so that they can right size the organization to have the bandwidth they need for meeting those projects as they come up, but also the mechanism to go out of house when they need to, either for the matter type or the size of it.
Do you have a master playbook you work from where it's akin to, when I think of some of the housing built in suburbs where people can choose from plan A or plan B, mirror images of each other perhaps? Or is that the approach you take, or is it much more of a bespoke offering where you're customizing things to individual clients and perhaps building from scratch for them?
Yeah, I'd say closer to the bespoke. I mean, certainly we use a template and we think through, we have kind of the roadmap of all the needs that they need. But I wouldn't say, to use your analogy, we have the plans laid out and it's as simple as picking cabinet colors and tile. So, different organizations have different needs. It kind of depends on how they're segmented, how the legal function is segmented. Bigger companies are going to have, effectively multiple legal teams that you need to engage with, and we may only be engaged with one of the several. So part of it could be, we're in one segment of a much larger, say, a holding company, and we're doing great work for that segment, but you don't have adoption across the aisle, if you will, to the other segment. So we're needing to design something for it could be manufacturing in one wing and consulting in another. Those are two very different things for the same company. So we try to do the best we can for the team that we're working for. If we can expand it to other parts of the business, we do that. But it usually is custom. I think I can't think of any two organizations that are the same. And really, I mean, the same goes for our reactive work. It's very it's not very often that we go into a client who's set up exactly the same from an infrastructure standpoint, from a information governance and the legal wing. It's everyone's a little bit different. So there's always a bespoke nature to some of the work we do.
When you are helping companies figure out what to do with the technology they have acquired, are there particular problems and pitfalls that you see occurring on a regular basis?
I think the most common is just adoption. I think they buy it, they install it, and they they need to get value out of it. So thinking through how to get the ROI on their investment, how do you actually start putting data into it? And that change management process is almost much harder than making the decision to buy it, because I think you can watch demos of a product, you know that it's what you need, you go through a POC, you know that it's what it does, the functions that you need, and now you have it, but you gotta get someone to adopt it, and they've got their normal way of working, and you have to change their way of thinking and their workflow, and people normally don't like change. So all that change management process comes into play. That's usually the biggest barrier. I think once you get people working in it, they get it. It makes sense. They understand how to do it, and then where the other that ROI piece that I just mentioned. So once they are actually using it, helping them actually understand how much value they created by bringing it in house. So oftentimes they'll ask us just to be that calculator for them. Hey, I'm going into my boss's meeting this week. I'd love to show what bringing in this technology has meant for us, and we'll do some rough calculations versus had you outsourced all that, and that can really help the person that procured the technology show the value to their leadership, and keep it going. And that kind of causes a virtuous cycle that means adoption keeps up because everyone sees the value.
Part of an ROI evaluation is, of course, looking to see how you can demonstrate that there have been cost savings. Another, and I would think much more difficult to calculate part, would be to focus on the advantages that the things they gain having brought that software in and then figured out how to use it effectively. How do you assess and convey that latter part?
Yeah, that's certainly harder. I mean, we tend to look at the ROI as just, were you to outsource this project, this is what it would have cost you, and that's where you saved. I think the insights you get from the data, that's going to be really hard to quantify. Did you find the fact that you needed that allowed you to settle a case early and resolve all those downstream issues and costs? How do you quantify that? That's really difficult. We try to do it a little bit, but I think unless you have a really good feedback loop between the team using it saying, oh, hey, a couple months ago, I remember we ran this project through, I found the documents I needed right away, and said, oh boy, that just saved us a ton of money. I mean, you're not going to get that information necessarily unless someone's tracking it. So that's just really hard to do. But I think that's what we explain to clients is the advantage, and maybe an unseen gain for them. And usually what we end up seeing is that the ROI just on versus outsourcing alone is enough to justify the platform. So you sort of don't need to go to that bigger picture piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, that tends to be the trend.
Well, so, and certainly if you've got that first part, if you can show the cost savings, there's less pressure, I would think, to get to that second and more difficult to quantify discussion.
Yeah, that's right.
In just the moment or so left, what if you were to just give folks a couple of takeaways as they're thinking about bringing technology in-house, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think you got to understand your own legal department and what your budgeting process is, whether you even have the capability and capacity to buy something like that, and then are you really realistically going to bring in a team to run it, and who are those people going to be? If you can't get to that part of the conversation, then kind of looking at technology probably isn't even worth your time. So I think you just need to know your company, sort of know the volume that you go through, one of the first questions we always ask is, well, how much litigation did you go through last year? Could you give us a chart? Could you find all the receipts from all your invoices from all your vendors? And they're sort of like, no, so if you don't have that basic part mapped out, you're going to have a hard time understanding how much technology you even need. But there are folks out there that can help figure that out for you. So that would probably be my best takeaway. If you're thinking about bringing in some software, you probably also, whether that software provider provides these services or you need to go elsewhere, also think about getting some outside help to advise you on it.
On that, thanks. Thank you very much, John, for joining us today. John Marsal is a managing director at Alvarez and Marsal. Thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thank you.